The wind moved slowly across the wire fences, carrying dust and silence through the American POW camp somewhere in western Germany. Spring 1945. Thousands of prisoners had passed through these gates before. Exhausted soldiers, wounded teenagers, officers pretending to stay proud. The guards had seen fear, anger, even relief, but that morning felt different. A military truck stopped near the processing tent. The engine died. No one moved for several seconds. The men waiting in line noticed the tension immediately. 3 soldiers stepped down first. Young, tired, uniforms hanging loose after months of retreat. Behind them came someone smaller, holding their coat tightly closed despite the warm air. One of the guards frowned. "Another medical case?" he muttered. The camp medic shook his head. "No paperwork says that." The prisoner kept their head down, avoiding eye contact. The coat looked too large, almost like it had been borrowed in a hurry. Normally, the process was routine. Name, rank, weapon history, medical inspection. But when the newcomer reached the table, even the clerk hesitated. The hands were shaking. "Name?" the American officer asked. A quiet voice answered, barely above a whisper. The officer paused. Something wasn't right. The prisoner's collar hid most of the face, and the coat stayed closed with both hands gripping it tightly. The line behind them grew silent. The interpreter leaned closer, repeating the questions in German. Still, hesitation. Finally, the officer sighed. "Look," he said calmly, "we have to process everyone the same way. Open your coat." The words hung in the air. Conversation stopped. Even the guards nearby turned to watch. For a long moment, the prisoner didn't move. Then, slowly, trembling fingers reached for the buttons. One by one. The camp grew so quiet that the wind against the tents sounded loud. When the coat opened, no one spoke. Not the guards, not the prisoners, not even the medic. The entire camp seemed frozen in place, because what stood there wasn't what anyone expected to see walking out of a German military truck, and suddenly every assumption the Americans had about who they were holding changed. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but to everyone watching, it felt much longer. The American officer lowered his clipboard slowly. The medic beside him exchanged a quick glance, unsure what to say first. The prisoner stood frozen, coat opened, shoulders tense as if waiting for something worse than capture. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the guards, who had seen the worst parts of the war, suddenly looked uncomfortable. The officer cleared his throat. "Get the medic," he said quietly, though the medic was already standing there. The prisoner's breathing was fast, shallow. The air around them felt heavy, as if the entire camp was watching without moving. Behind the processing line, other POWs whispered. Some turned away. The Americans had expected soldiers. Tired, angry, defeated. They hadn't expected this. The medic stepped forward gently, lowering his voice so the others wouldn't hear. "You're safe here," he said through the interpreter. "No one is going to hurt you." But the prisoner didn't respond. Instead, the hands instinctively tried to pull the coat closed again. The officer hesitated. Regulations were clear. Every prisoner had to be searched, examined, documented. No exceptions. He hated what came next. "We need a full check," he said softly. The interpreter translated. The prisoner's eyes widened with fear, not from pain, but from humiliation. One of the younger American guards looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Another shifted his weight, pretending to watch the gate instead. This wasn't how the war was supposed to end. The officer sighed, then made a decision. "Clear the area," he ordered. The nearby soldiers stepped back. The noise of the camp slowly returned. Distant voices, boots on dirt, metal clanging. But the tension inside the circle remained. As the medic prepared the examination tent, the prisoner spoke for the first time in a steady voice. A single sentence. The interpreter froze, then repeated it quietly. "She says." They told her nothing. The officer frowned. Nothing about what? The answer came slower this time. About what would happen after surrender. For a moment, no one moved, and the Americans suddenly realized that fear wasn't coming from them. It came from stories, rumors, and propaganda that had followed these prisoners all the way to the gates. The officer nodded toward the tent. "Take her inside, gently." As the canvas flap closed behind them, the guards outside remained silent, because the war might have been ending. But the confusion it left behind had only just arrived. The inside of the medical tent was quiet except for the sound of canvas moving in the wind. Outside, the camp slowly returned to its routine. Boots walking on gravel, distant voices, metal gates closing. But those who had seen the moment at the processing line couldn't stop thinking about it. The medic worked carefully, speaking in a calm voice, giving explanations before every movement. No shouting, no rough orders, just patience. The prisoner sat rigid, eyes fixed on the ground, bracing for something that never came. Minutes passed. The interpreter finally broke the silence. "She says," she thought, "this would be worse." The medic paused. "Worse how?" Another quiet translation. The answer came slowly, almost ashamed. They said surrender meant humiliation, punishment, revenge. The medic exchanged a glance with the officer standing near the entrance. They had heard this before. Stories spread across collapsing fronts, rumors passed from unit to unit, warnings meant to keep soldiers fighting until the last moment. Fear was a weapon, too. When the examination was finished, the medic stepped back. "You're fine," he said gently. "No one here is going to hurt you." The words took time to sink in. For the first time since arriving, the prisoner lifted their head and looked directly at the Americans. Not with trust, not yet, but with confusion. Outside, the camp remained quiet as the tent flap opened. The officer walked beside the prisoner instead of ahead, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the guards nearby. No one joked. No one stared. The line of POWs watched silently, uncertain what they had just witnessed. Not a victory, not a defeat. Something else. A moment where the war's noise briefly disappeared, leaving only people trying to understand each other after years of fear. As the prisoner was guided toward the housing area, one of the younger guards finally spoke. "That's it?" he asked quietly. "After everything?" The officer looked toward the fading evening sky. "Yeah," he said, "that's it. Because sometimes the loudest thing left after war was silence, and that silence followed the camp long after the moment was over.